This is Bedtime Stories, Grown-Up Edition, Dreams and Nightmares, Part 1. When Stax picked Rennie up from the police station in the middle of the night, he took her right back to LJ's house at the family complex in Denton. Needless to say, Rennie was fit to be tied. And she said, "Can you believe this mess? You know good and damn well they don't actually believe that I killed Ron or that funny-looking nigga he was smashing." Stax asked, "Then what was this all about, Miss Crash Out Queen?" Rennie laughed, and then she told him all about the interrogation. The minute the detective introduced himself, Rennie said, "Attorney." And before he could complete 3 full sentences, Rennie had said, "Attorney," at least 6 or 7 times. The detective was annoyed as hell, because before he could even tell Rennie why she was there or let her call her attorney, her lawyer was being escorted into the interrogation room, and he was playing no games. He wanted to know immediately why his client was there. When the detective said that Rennie's DNA had been found on the scene of an alleged suicide, insert the M and the S, or at least the scene where they supposedly began, Rennie looked like she had no clue what he was talking about. And when her attorney looked at her, she just shrugged. So he asked who had been killed, who supposedly killed themselves, and where exactly did all of this occur. And when the detective said that the decedents were Ronald Hobbs and Kane Lewis, and that the initial scene was Ron's house in Dallas, Rennie laughed. Both the detective and her attorney looked at her like she had lost her mind. Rennie said, "My bad. I am not laughing about people being dead, I promise. I'm laughing because this is funny as hell. You really got me down here against my will, interrupted my vacation, all because you found proof that I've been at my brother-in-law's house, a house he shared with my sister and their kids. That's just stupid. Why wouldn't my DNA be in their house? We just celebrated their baby's dedication." Before she could say more, her attorney stopped her, looked at the detective and said, "What else do you have?" And the detective said, "Had we found hair or saliva, that would make sense. But we have questions about why we found partially cleaned urine on the oriental rug under the entryway table." The detective and the attorney both looked at Rennie, and once again, Rennie shrugged. Her attorney was rather quick on his feet, though. Said, "For all you know, my client had a little too much to drink and didn't quite make it to the bathroom. Ron was like a brother to her. His loss served a devastating blow to the entire family." And then Rennie actually tried to look sad, while inside she was thinking, Stax might be right. I probably do need a medication evaluation, because I don't think normal people piss on niggas during fights. What she said, though, was the same thing she'd said inside the back of that patrol car. "This is why I hate Texas. You come here on vacation, you leave on probation." And the detective said, "Too bad you will not be leaving Texas. If you don't start talking, you may never leave Texas. You'll be spending the rest of your natural life in a maximum security Texas prison." And to his absolute dismay, Rennie laughed hysterically. And this time, she did not apologize. Her attorney said, "If I was not here in my official capacity, I'd be laughing right along with my client. Neither I nor she is buying this bull. For the record, my client knows nothing about the deaths of her brother-in-law and his friend, and now we would like to know what this is really about, and if you can't tell us, you can leave and go and get your supervisor." The detective went to speak, and the attorney said, "We are done here." The detective just stood up and walked out of the room. The attorney looked at Rennie, and she just shook her head. And he knew he was right. She really knew nothing about Ron and Kane's death. Several minutes later, the door opened, and in walked Supervisor Fred Acevedo from the FBI. He introduced himself, took a seat, looked at Rennie and said, "I understand that you, young lady, have a very unique set of skills. A set of skills that the FBI can use. I also understand that you have a documented mental health history that would probably make it rather difficult for us to make murder charges stick. But with your experience with being institutionalized, I'm sure you would much rather lend your expertise to helping the government as opposed to spending the rest of your life in a mental institution. Am I right?" And then Rennie said, "Nigga, ain't no way you interrupted my vacation for this. We could have had this conversation when I came back. I tell you what, I do have some expertise that I can lend you. You listening?" Then she leaned in close, and Supervisor Acevedo did the same. Then Rennie said, "You can go and find the biggest there is and suck it through a silly straw." And hearing that, her attorney knew that Rennie would not be playing ball. So his job was to get Rennie the hell out of there as soon as possible before she put hands and feet on Supervisor Acevedo and got some real charges. She was not known for being a patient woman. His other job was to find out what the FBI knew about Renia Johnson and what the hell they wanted from her, because he was going to need something to use as a bargaining tool in the future, just in case Rennie found herself in this position again. And that's what he did. He asked questions and Supervisor Acevedo answered most of them. He was not going to show all of his cards. What he did say made it very clear that the FBI knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that Rennie was working for the Five Families as a chemist, that the Queen Mother was sponsoring her education at MIT, and that Rennie was a violent sociopath who had absolutely no business getting a PhD in biochemistry. But even though Baptiste St. James' money was long, and they could therefore buy their way into any place, Rennie's crazy behind was actually a gifted scientist. And her brand of crazy made her mind work in such a way that she was an absolute genius at biochem. And that made her an absolute gold mine for the Five Families. And the feds wanted a piece. And they were absolutely willing to pin a double murder on Rennie to get it. The only thing that her attorney couldn't figure out is how in the hell the feds had figured it out. But Rennie had already put two and two together. The man sitting in front of her was Q's supervisor at the feds. And just days earlier, he had asked Q to give him the Five Families chemist. He hadn't named her, but clearly he'd already known her name. And there was only one thing that she had done that could have possibly put her on the feds' radar. She traveled to Japan against the Queen Mother's wishes. She'd gone with Catherine to meet the Tanaka Enterprises chemist in person. She wanted to get out of Texas desperately. She wanted to see firsthand what they were cooking up in Japan. So she begged Catherine to take her. And Catherine agreed. To her surprise, it wasn't difficult to convince Catherine to help her lie to the Queen Mother. What Rennie didn't know at the time was Catherine was willing to do just about anything to ensure that her agenda was fulfilled. Because an agreement with Suki Tanaka was the only way she was going to save her own life. But what Rennie did know was that in exchange for the Queen Mother's sponsorship, tutelage, and mentorship, Rennie had agreed to inform the Queen Mother of her whereabouts at all times. And during the war with the traffickers, she'd agreed not to travel internationally. Rennie had assumed that the Queen Mother's concern was for her safety, that she might get kidnapped or something. She hadn't even considered that the feds would be watching the comings and goings of major players and known associates in the Five Families like Catherine. And that as soon as her passport was scanned, immediately after Catherine's, she would immediately be on the feds' radar. Hindsight was 20/20, and Rennie knew that that was the only way that the feds could have possibly known she was more than a civilian family member. And in the car on the way back to the family complex in Denton, Stacks just shook his head. And Rennie said, "I'm gonna have to tell the Queen Mother and she gonna kill me." Stacks said, "She just might, but she definitely gonna kill Catherine. She damn near beat that woman to death at the round table because of that mess with Ron, so you know it's over for her, right?" Rennie said, "That's her bad. She should have did the right thing. Everybody know how I give it up. The expectation should always be that I'm gonna do the wrong thing. But Catherine is supposed to be the older, wiser, more mature one. So she should have knew better." Stacks just laughed and Rennie said, "Did I ever tell you about the time when my grandmother came to visit and she was staying at a hotel and I went to stay with her at the hotel?" Stacks said no, and Rennie said, "She was staying at a fancy hotel. They had an all-you-could-eat breakfast buffet with all of the fixings. My eyes was bigger than my stomach, and my grandmother let me eat everything I wanted. So I did. I ate so much damn food I made myself sick. And when my grandmother had the nerve to say I had eaten too much, I looked at that lady and told her, 'You the grandmother, it's your fault. You should have known not to let a 6-year-old eat all this damn food.'" Stacks was cracking up. Rennie said, "My grandmother was hot. The next morning, she made me eat a bowl of oatmeal and a damn apple. I called my mother to come get me immediately." Imagine trying to blame a 6-year-old for eating too much when you let them do it. Stacks continued laughing and Rennie said, "At 6 years old, I could outthink most adults, but I still needed adult supervision." And Stacks said, "And now at this big age, you still need adult supervision." Rennie said, "And do you sure you want to marry me?" Stacks said, "Absolutely, you stuck with me. You a crash out queen, but you tried to tuck my licensed 40 cal. You a rider. I just wish you understood that you could be a handful, but..." And then Rennie finished his usual sentence saying, But don't be a problem. I know. I can't help it. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I'ma always come up with bad ideas, and I'ma always need somebody else to be the level-headed one. Otherwise, I am gonna be a problem. But I try. I promise I really, really try. Zach said, calm down. I know you try. And as long as you keep trying, me and all the other people you love will keep on cleaning up the messes you make. Speaking of messes, I'ma handle whoever failed to clean that rug properly. Rennie said, I guess I went too far. Stack said, you think? Tell me something. How did your DNA even get in CODIS? Rennie said, so what had happened was, the very first time I used my chemistry skills for evil, I tried to kill my college professor's wife. Stack said, what the hell? And then Rennie told him all about her obsession with her college professor, LJ stopping her from offing the woman and having her institutionalized so that she could avoid jail time. But he was unfortunately unable to avoid her prints and her DNA being entered into CODIS. Rennie said, I knew it was in there, which is why when I do what I do, legitimately or otherwise, I protect my biological matter. But I lost control at Ron's. I was seeing red. When that fuddy-dud in the face-ass nigga walked out looking comfortable as hell like he was at home, I felt like I had got cheated on. Besides, Anya is not just Q and Donovan's baby sister. She's everybody's baby sister. And if anybody causes her pain physically or emotional, it's up for they behind. And I put that on everything. And early the next morning, Rennie told the Queen Mother all of that too. And the Queen Mother was pissed. She didn't even go off on Rennie because nothing Rennie had said had surprised her in the least bit. So her anger wasn't directed at Rennie. It was directed at Catherine. She called Saint. And when he answered, she said, you better get Catherine the hell out of Texas immediately. Because if you don't, I'm going to put her in the dirt. And this time, nobody. Not Idra, not Manny, Suki, Anya, Rennie, Janelle, or Natalia will be able to stop me. Do you understand? And while Saint didn't want Catherine back in Miami until Natalia was settled, Chantal was out of the woods, and he was back from his planned trip to Trinidad, he knew from the sound of the Queen Mother's voice that he needed to alter his plan. So in Chantal's hospital room, he looked at Natalia and said, I'm going to need you in Miami for a few more days. And at the family complex in Denton, the Queen Mother looked at Rennie and said, you told me you were meeting with the Tanaka chemist in Miami. And then because you were overzealous and thought that you knew better than me, you figured you could go to Japan. No one would be the wiser and nothing would come from it. Do you understand now why you were wrong? Rennie said, they can't possibly make me work for the feds because the Queen Mother said, do you understand why you need to follow my instructions? Rennie said, yes, ma'am. The Queen Mother said, I'm going to get you out of this, out of all of it. And when I do, you'll be forfeiting your vacation. Rennie said, oh, man. The Queen Mother said, cut it out. You need to be glad you're not going to jail for the rest of your life. We don't need the police, the feds, or anybody else asking any questions about the deaths of Ron and Kane. If you haven't figured it out, Kane most certainly did not kill Ron or himself. I'm going to get to the bottom of why there are still questions. I'm going to make those questions go away. And I'm going to get the feds to forget all about you working for them. And you're going to stay put, stay out of trouble. And when the coast is clear, you're going to go back to MIT, get your degree, get married, and move to Puerto Rico. Then the Queen Mother walked out of the room and headed straight to Q and Angela's house, where Q told her all about Supervisor Acevedo having asked for Rennie and Melissa, and about Rudy Hobbs, Ron's younger brother, vowing to get to the bottom of what actually happened to his brother and his lover. The Queen Mother said, so now I need to clean all of this up. Q said, I'll handle it, Medea. The Queen Mother said, no, you won't. You should probably have a conversation with Melissa, though. Q said, absolutely not. The Queen Mother said, I thought you learned from all of my mistakes not to make those kinds of decisions for your children. After what Melissa went through at the light, it's highly possible that she might just be on board, especially considering that one of her mentors at the light is the son of the vice president, and he's working for the government. Or did you forget? When Melissa was almost kidnapped at her spiritual boarding school, she thwarted that kidnapping. And it was that entire set of circumstances that initiated Q's meeting with the vice president and his agreement to be the go-between between the feds and the five families. The vice president's son just happened to be a graduate of the light. He was also on the spectrum, just like Melissa. And he'd been paired up with Melissa as her graduate mentor. He'd been telling her all about the work that he did for the government, and Melissa had been surprisingly interested. The young man was on Melissa's guest list for her Sweet 16 party in Puerto Rico. Q said, in order to have that conversation with Melissa, I'm gonna have to have it with Angela. She's already pretty pissed off with me about the whole situation with Michael. The Queen Mother said, well, it sounds to me like you're gonna have to put your big boy pants on. Prepare yourself for your wife's wrath and do what's necessary to reestablish order and peace in your home. I didn't raise you to be an avoider. And I think you know pretty well just how badly things can turn out when you stop communicating with your co-commander. Your father in that situation with India comes to mind. Before Q could respond, the Queen Mother walked out. Q headed to find Angela and found that she was nowhere on the premises. He called LJ to see if she was at his house. And when LJ said that he hadn't seen Angela since the night before at Bellamy's, and they'd barely said 2 words to one another since the round table had gone on recess on Monday, Q said, something's up with her, man, and I'm having a hard time. She's pissed with me, and I get it, but I don't even know how to make things right. I need to talk to her about something, and that's just gonna make stuff worse. I need a solid, bro. LJ said, I got you. Q didn't even need to elaborate. He needed LJ to tap in with Angela, find out where her head was, run interference a little bit, and get her primed and ready for the conversation that the two of them were going to have. Q had checked Angela's location while he and LJ were on the phone and discovered that she was at her office at Vibrantly You. It was a Saturday. The only other employees who would be on the premises were those who were responsible for fulfilling orders, and they would be in the warehouse, not the office building. So LJ figured this was as good a time as any to make a special appearance at Vibrantly You. Meanwhile, in the back seat of a chauffeured car, the Queen Mother was on FaceTime with her granddaughter, Melissa. She said, hey, big girl, how you settling in? Melissa said, I'm fine. You look pretty today, Grandmere. Where you going? The Queen Mother said, I'm going to have a conversation with a man who wants to be your supervisor. Melissa said, huh? The Queen Mother said, let me ask you a question. Do you still want to work for the government when you graduate? Melissa said, yeah, I do. The Queen Mother said, that's good to hear. Your parents will be discussing it with you further, but I just needed to verify that before I head to this meeting. Melissa said, okay. I got a question though. Can you and Pop wait until after my Sweet 16 to get married? The Queen Mother chuckled and said, of course, baby. Then the chauffeured car pulled up outside a gourmet grocery store in the Oak Lawn area of Dallas called Eatsy's Market and Bakery. The Queen Mother's meeting was going to be held on the produce aisle. She walked in a tailored women's business suit, looking like money, the queen bee that she was. Grabbed a cart, pushed it right over to Supervisor Fred Acevedo, who was checking out avocados. And when she got next to him, she said, I understand you made a very bad decision last night, and I'm here to help you figure out how best to rectify it. When the conversation was done, Supervisor Acevedo and the Queen Mother had an understanding. He had rattled that man's bones and shot up his blood pressure. He had never in his life been ran down on by a 60-plus-year-old grandmother in a tailored suit with a 9mm strapped to her hip in the produce aisle of his favorite grocery store on a Saturday morning. He'd expected the Five Families to send goons. He'd expected a phone call from Q. He'd expected to be able to use Rennie's DNA as leverage, because he'd settle for either her or Melissa, but he needed one of them. When he left the grocery store, he had his avocados, but he didn't have Rennie or Melissa. The Queen Mother had said in no uncertain terms that whatever Melissa did with her future was up to Melissa. She was amenable to working for the government, though, and he didn't need to pull any more stunts in an effort to get his way, because any more stunts might result in the expiration of his membership with life. She'd also made it clear that all questions about Ron and Kane's death needed to stop being asked, because it was exactly what it looked like it was, and she didn't care who was asking the questions or where they worked. Supervisor Acevedo didn't even ask the Queen Mother how she knew where to find him. And if she was anybody else, he would have been surprised by her audacity. But he knew that Q's mother, the head of the Baptiste family, wasn't nothing to play with. She'd rescued herself more than 30 years earlier from the hands of the Ramirez family, took out over 20 men, and up until a few years ago, lived an absolutely legitimate life. Right up until men ran in her home in Fort Worth, where she laid down on her catwalk with an AK-47 and killed everything moving. If anybody could clock his ticket, The woman standing in front of him, casually choosing exotic fruits, was absolutely the one. And he ain't want no problems. He wasn't even gonna wait till Monday morning to make the necessary phone calls to make it all go away. As soon as he got in his car, he called Rudy Hobbs and let him know that any and everyone who could be questioned had been. And there was absolutely no reason to believe that the deaths of Ron and Kane weren't exactly what law enforcement had concluded they were. And that if he didn't let it go, he'd make a phone call to his supervisor, questioning his fitness for duty. Then he called the local DA and lifted the hold on Rennie's travel, informed her that the case needed to be closed, but told her not to let Rennie know, because he'd handle it. The Queen Mother had told him that she intended to make Rennie sweat a little bit. She'd give him one more shot to convince Rennie to take him up on his offer. And when she turned him down, like she knew she would, he could then release her to travel and inform her that the investigation had been closed. Meanwhile, at Vibrantly You, Angela is slammed with Vibrantly You work, collaborating with LJ to tighten the reins within the five families, and identifying more lanes of legitimate business so that her children have options. When LJ walked in, she was going over resumes for her now vacant chief of operations position and for business attorneys. Regina was obviously no longer an option, but her mind was going a mile per minute, because all she could think about was the situation with Michael and her frustration with Q. And when she looked up and saw LJ, all she could think about was the conversation she'd had with Mom Brenda. LJ would always be her best friend, but that friendship was going to have to change. The fact that Mom Brenda had thought that she and LJ were going to end up together when she was married to Mom Brenda's son Marcus, despite the fact that LJ and Regina were an item at the time, had Angela feeling rather uncomfortable. And all of the things that Regina had said to her during their showdown had also been ringing in her ears, because Regina had said a lot of hurtful things, but they were not all untrue. LJ had been her safe place, her defender, her protector. He'd always dropped everything and came running when she needed him. And now she needed him more than ever and knew that it wasn't appropriate for her to discuss with him her issues with her husband. She had no idea that her husband had sent him there. So when he asked what was on her mind, she deflected and said that she could no longer lean on him. And when he asked what changed, she told him she had. She told him that she appreciated the fact that he'd always been there, and she was grateful for it, but she was Q's responsibility. When he questioned why she wasn't discussing whatever the issue was with Q, she deflected again. She told him that he'd been a gift and a curse, a lifesaver in one season and a crutch in the next, that he'd been everything for everybody, and it was time that he focused on himself, on what he needed, so that the love he deserves can find him. And LJ said, "I'm not looking for love." Angela said, "You were designed for love, to give it and receive it, LJ. God desires for you to have it in abundance. For years, you've been walking around with a hole in your cup, and everyone, including me, has been lapping up every drip that's been leaking out of it. It's time that you let God patch up that hole so your cup can fill up, and then you can share what overflows from it down and into the saucer beneath it with everyone else."